You're listening to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm your host, Amy Stone. Here, I share stories from real people navigating the adventure that I call adulting. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Well, hello, friends. Today, on this episode, I'm going to introduce you to Jocelyn Bates, and we're going to talk about grief. Jocelyn's parents died within 7 days of each other, which is quite the story. She shares it with us. She shares how she experienced it, how she came through it, and what that was like, the decisions she made, the decisions she didn't feel she could make. That's what we talk about. There's a little bit of something about this story that I'm going to draw attention to and mention before we begin. Part of this story involves COVID and lockdown and hospitals and vaccines, right? This is still, even though this was years ago, a pretty divisive and polarizing topic, right? So just know the following things. This is my show. I make it, I produce it, I host it, but it's not all about me or how I see the world or how I think that the world should be. I share the experiences and the stories of my guests in whatever form they come. So I have guests on the show who have very different experiences and very different opinions and worldviews than I do. That's as it should be, right? What I believe is that respectful sharing of these experiences is something that I'm doing on purpose. And as you listen to this story, take what works for you and leave what doesn't. You get to make up your mind about these things and the things in your life on your own. Just know that the opinions of the people who are guests on this show may or may not match my personal opinions. And that's something that just is. I may or may not tell you where I weigh in on these topics. I might keep you guessing. So if you're ready, let's do this. Jocelyn Bates, welcome to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. Are you ready for a chat?
I am. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, let's
Thank you for
do
having
it.
me.
I'm happy to have you. I'm happy to have this conversation. So, I start most of my interviews by asking people what part of the world they call home. So, what part of the blue marble are you on?
I am in New Jersey, close to New
Wow.
York, in the tri-state area.
Very nice. Very nice. I grew up in partially in New York City, so I love many things Jersey. I like the farmers markets and tomatoes and fresh fruit on
Oh
the.
yeah.
I like the shore. I like
It is
many
nice.
things, many things Jersey. So in a second, we're going to start the official interview, but I want to ask you one more get to know you question before we do that, which is share with us something that for you is a hobby or a pastime or even a passion project, but that it isn't directly tied to your work or your family.
Yeah, that's a hard one because I do what I love, but
I get
but
that a lot, Jocelyn.
yeah,
I do. You can
yeah.
imagine.
I would say, and I don't know if this would be considered a pastime or a hobby, but every day, sometime in the middle of the day, I go and lay down under the covers on my grounding mat in my bed and I breathe.
No, I think that's
That's
so.
it.
I mean, I don't know if I would call that a hobby, but I
But
think
it
it's
is
worth
close.
mentioning. So
Yeah.
definitely worth mentioning. So
Yeah.
big fan, you're a big fan. So grounding, you have a grounding mat, which that like
Yeah.
goes on the surface and it has specific things. Grounding, the idea of putting your feet on
The
nature,
earth.
right? That
Yeah.
concept. That I live in Miami, Florida, where we have sandy soil and fire ants. And
Ooh.
so I was telling people, I'm like, this modifies in my pocket of the world because you're taking your life in your hands if you're walking barefoot through the grass. Also, the grass here doesn't feel good. So
Well, we have deer ticks. So,
same,
that's why I
yeah.
have a grounding mat.
Yeah, no, yeah, the ticks, you got to take the ticks seriously. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I put my feet on the beach, I put my feet in the ocean, connecting with nature, but I don't mess with the grass in South
Yeah.
Florida. Also, the grass we have in South Florida is really a weed. It's crabgrass. So it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel good. If I had soft, fun, tick-free grass, I would feel differently.
Oh, so would I.
Yeah. 100%.
So
All
would I.
right. So, the topic of the day, not grass or ticks, but we are going to talk about processing the massive grief that you went through when you lost both your parents in a very short time frame. Does that sound
Mm.
like something you're ready to talk about today?
I am. I am.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
I always like so I sometimes I say, are you ready for a fun chat? But I have to be careful to not like say that without thinking about it when I'm talking to people about grief because it's not always a fun chat. It's an important chat, but it's not always a fun chat. Okay,
Mhm.
so you shared with me on the intake form that you are an only child. I think that's right. Okay, so you are an only
I
child.
am.
Would you say that you had a close relationship with your parents growing up?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I am an only child, and my parents weren't super close to the rest of the family who was in New York. So they moved out to Jersey. And so I didn't even have really that really large extent. I mean, granted, on like Christmas or, whatever, I would see them, but I didn't have that. So I was really close to my parents. My parents were awesome.
That is a wonderful thing not to be taken for
Yeah.
granted because that we all know many people who don't have close relationships. So it's not a guarantee
No.
that we get along with our parents. And it's also, I think it's interesting. I'd like to that you pointed that out, that part of it was that they weren't super close to the extended family because one of the should haves that we can get in our heads as adult is that there's something wrong with our family if our family is not big. And
Mhm.
I had a very small family growing up, and so we were close. There just weren't a lot of people. A
Yeah.
little tiny. We always fit in a very small little container, and that was all there was.
Yeah.
And that was all there was. And so, if I watched TV and it was like the Brady Bunch, I would have been like, something's wrong with me. But no, that wasn't it. So I don't want to put you on the spot or ask you to like share an unpleasant experience, but I do think that the story needs some context. So, to understand the story from a listener perspective, is it okay if I ask you some question about your parents and their deaths?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So, how long ago did this happen, and how oldish were they roughly?
So my parents died in 2021. So right now it's about 3.5 years, a little over 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
And my mom was 74 and my father was 73.
So they're pretty young
Yes, yes,
in terms of that, and it's pretty recent.
yes.
Pretty
Hmm.
recent. Yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
So then you started to tell me this in the pre-talk, but we didn't get through this. Were these sudden medical events, or were they going through like a long-term health sort of thing?
Oh no, they were healthy. They just, I mean, right before my mother went into the hospital, right before that, they had just come back from a week vacation to celebrate their 51st anniversary.
Okay.
So they were just in Atlantic City, living it up, taking walks on the beach.
And then it was very sudden. And
Yeah, and I grew up, so my parents were very holistic. Like I was never vaccinated, like they didn't take medications. I don't think, I mean, my mother ate beet chews to keep her heart healthy, and my dad he used to drink juices, and so they were very healthy.
they're very healthy and not big fans of Western medicine, or
No, not at all.
would you? So they're too young to have been hippie, but were they like sort of granola-y or just people of the
I, you
earth,
know,
or
I grew up with them being very, I mean, they used to bring me to Edgar Casey's ARE every year for like a big convention. And my mom was big in, she channeled angels. She was an aromatherapist. She was a Feldenkrais practitioner in her later life, but she worked at like Bell Labs early on, right? But
okay.
she always had that. And my dad was a truck driver and he loved her so much. And they just kind of, they did this thing. I think she opened his mind to things because he was a Marine in in the Vietnam
Okay.
War. And so he kind of had a different upbringing. Um, and I think she just kind of brought him along. I think she opened the doors for him in spirituality and crunchiness,
All right. No,
granola-iness.
all right. I definitely, you don't think of the Vietnam Marine as being a spiritual crunchy person, at least at the start. That's
Well, I'll
not
tell you what,
necessarily
my dad told me some stories during that. Like there was a time when he was in Vietnam, and it's just a random story, but he was a minesweeper, and next to them was wherever they were in Vietnam. He knew all of that, but wherever they were next to the snipers, and he was out at a tree and or whatever they had, right? I don't know what they had. Yeah, they were trees. And so he saw something on the ground and it like glinted. And as he went down to pick it up, a shot fired right where his head was because
okay.
they
Yeah.
were with the snipers. And when he came up, he realized what happened, right? Because everything
That's like
was
a sliding
grazed.
door moment. If he hadn't have bent down.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so he's had those moments throughout his life. He had them. And so I'm sure the spirituality was partly there. And he was blown up in the Vietnam War. So he experienced massive amounts of trauma. And I think just when you go through things like that and you have those moments, those like you called it sliding
Yep.
door moment, it begins to expand in you and you
Yes.
just you question things and he was the only one who survived the minesweeping. And
Wow.
so his truck was blown up. And so, when you're the only one that survives that, I think you start to question, like, okay, what's this life about? What's this going on? There's
I
no reason he should have
definitely,
survived.
no, I think that's fair. And I think that, what I said was absolutely based on just nothing perception. The people who are drawn to traditional
Oh yeah, Marines
military
or
service in the
yeah.
70s versus today, and the stereotype that goes with it, which means that it's not based on anything and probably isn't right. But you think of the person who enlists or is drafted into military service as being a person who is, especially in the 60s and 70s, not the same person who would have been going to Woodstock and following
Right.
Grateful Dead. So that was the
Exactly.
stereotype that I was basing it on. But I absolutely thank you for calling me in on all of those things that A, that's just a trope that's not based on anything and a fallacy in so many things. And B, obviously being in a position where your life is on the line and things are happening is like any of those things that you're going to be aware of miracles and all of the stuff. I don't know. I can't imagine. So, all right.
Yeah.
So there we are. So your dad was a truck driver. Your mom was more an engineering, a technical person, but also very spiritual. All right. So I think you also mentioned as part of the story that when this happened, you guys were living together. Is there more to that story? Like, why were you guys all living together? And tell us about why that was going on.
Yeah, my family, me and my husband and my three kids lived in the house. When I had my first daughter, now I had been pregnant before her and I had a stillbirth, and we went through a lot. And when I finally got pregnant again and got far enough along, my parents ended up putting on the house I grew up in a huge, like ensuite for them to live
Okay.
in, for us to stay with them. And so yeah, we were here, and I was all in. I feel like too much in these days kids are not with all their generations.
Right.
I didn't grow up really with my generations, and I think I missed out on some of that, you know what I'm saying? And they
Yeah.
had the opportunity to have my parents very, very, I mean, in the house with them, second parents, um, and it helped us out monetarily while we were going through everything. Like while I took off of work for a while, it allowed us to homeschool,
Yeah.
and not have to have two people working. So yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
we were
So I
living
think
here.
that now we would call, so when I was a kid, we would call those like mother-in-law suites, like was an
Mm.
old-fashioned name. Now they're calling them ADUs, additional domestic alternative. I don't know what it stands for actually. But this is like either an attached or slightly removed, spot that somebody can stay in. And then now we call, like you were saying, the multi-generational living arrangement. The interview I did earlier today, we talked about it, that she grew up in a multi-generational situation and there was shame attached to it, like because it's
Oh yeah.
right, like it's like a success in the United States that we move away from our parents and live independently, but it's much more expensive.
It really is.
Much more expensive. 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right, so you are here. So grief is tough. Tell us a little bit of the story of what happened. So the story is that you lost both of your parents within a week. They
Yeah.
were healthy. They were people who did holistic and alternative healthy type things, it sounds like. So tell us a little bit about what happened.
So like I said, they were off on vacation. They took a week vacation for their 51st anniversary, because actually like 2021 was right when they started opening things back up.
Okay.
And so they weren't able to celebrate their 50th because that was 2020, right? And so they
Yeah.
went out to do this like week long. And I imagine they got COVID during that time. And it just happened to be at the same time while they were gone, my daughter got COVID as well. So there was a lot of it. I don't know if it was the same strain. Who knows? They were told us it was the Delta strain or whatever. And we got it in the house. And the kids, I didn't even think about it actually at first, because my kids had a sniffle and it was
Yeah.
summertime, right? Like it was like the end of summer. I was like, oh, they're just like they've been at the pool too much, that kind of a thing. And then, I got it and my husband got it, and I noticed my parents were starting to get sick. And I went down Like I was there and I was watching my parents and we were all in the house and just kind of sick, but nothing crazy. And then one night, it was really, my husband was better than I was quicker because I ended up taking care of everyone. You know, that's what every mother does. They get
Yeah.
it last because they're like holding on to dear life while their kids are sick. You
Yeah. Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I was sick and I had one 24-hour period that was like really bad and I couldn't get out of bed. I had like convulsions almost. Like there was just, it was
You
really
were
just not
sick.
fun.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get up. I had these like crazy fever. And during that time, I'm not sure if anyone checked on my parents or my mom, I mean, my dad. And my mom must have gone down the same time as I did. And as soon as I was up, like in that 24-hour period, I went up to check on her and she was delusional. There was not oxygen. Like she wasn't moving as much. And being a mom, I was moving all the time. So my lungs were
Right.
moving all the time. She was taking it easy. And my dad was also, because they were just having high fevers. Um, so and my mother had always said, don't ever bring me to the hospital. I don't want to go to the hospital. The last time, the only time she went to the hospital after she had me was to die, basically.
Okay.
And we called 911 and we got the ambulance there and we went through this whole rigmarole. And they didn't want to take her at first. And then they ended up taking her because they could see like her breathing, something here that was like
Something in her throat.
indenting. Right. They could see her breathing. But I'm like, I couldn't believe they didn't want to take her at first because I was like, she knows her name, but she doesn't know what it's like dark out and she thinks it's morning. And, she wasn't even really responding. And so they took her in.
That sounds
And
scary.
that's just the beginning of what
Yeah.
happened to us. When they took her in and we gave them all of her information, right? We gave them everything. They dropped her off in the ER without giving her to anyone. So she was unknown patient and untreated for 3 or 4 hours. And in that time, when they took her like oxygen at the house, I think it was like 72%. By the time they triaged her, it was 60% because they just left her in a hallway they didn't know who she was. So when we were trying to call, but at the time, there were protocols all over New Jersy.
So I
And
was
at the
going to
time,
say, like, in 2021, I don't remember what it was. So, but if you remember what the protocols were, because first of all, 2021 is when those of us who didn't get it during lockdown, when we went out, this is when we
got
all
it.
got it. I got mine on an airplane,
Right.
right? That's how.
Right.
So, yeah. So she goes in through
Yeah. So
rescue.
she, again, when they finally wanted to triage her, she didn't know her name.
Yeah.
And so they left her as unknown patient and they just left her in a hallway. And we couldn't find her. We weren't allowed in. We weren't allowed there. It was like nothing. So eventually my husband had to go to the hospital and point her out from outside a door, like this kind of thing to say, what was going on. Um, and they gave her oxygen right away. And within a few hours, she was like herself. She was like herself. But within that time, while she was under, they also gave her 27 other medications, um, all being remdesivir, all of these things that killed her system. So she was fine with the oxygen. And then, let's see, she went in on the 6th, she died on the 10th.
Wow. And so
Um,
she never came out of the hospital.
no, no, she died on the 10th. And it was all of these medications. They said she had a heart problem. She was on heart medication. I mean, it was because all of the side effects of all the medications and the remdesivir shuts down your system. And they told she had kidney problems. That's what the remdesivir does. And it causes a pneumonia. So she had the oxygen. Her scans were different. All of a sudden, 2 days later, her scans were crazy after they had the after she had the remdesivir, which causes that pneumonia. So within 2 days, she was like constantly complaining. And so it was like on the 6th, then on the 8th, that was my mom went in on the 6th of September. And on the 8th, my dad, who was 6'5", he was fine with the COVID, but he would sit up and like stand up and sit down. That's what would happen. And he like oxygen would just go, like that kind of thing. And he fell.
Okay.
And he fell in the tile floor in his bathroom and he couldn't get up. And so we went in and we called 911 because I didn't know what to do because there's so many stairs in our house and I wanted to make sure he didn't break anything in his neck. Like I needed
Yeah.
to. So they came in and I'll tell you, the EMT was much nicer to him than they were to my mom. They didn't drop
So
him
were you
off without
nervous?
anything. Yeah, I mean,
Were you
I didn't know
nervous at
what
this
else
point
to
already
do.
since you weren't thrilled with how the hospital care was going with your mom? But
Yeah.
it is one of these things, right? Like, so people, this is a family story, it's not like an interview. People feel like they shouldn't call rescue when somebody falls, but like, I don't know how tall you are. If you're like, my dad was above 6 feet and over 200 pounds. I couldn't have ever picked him up.
Oh, I couldn't. It took
Right.
me and my husband to pick him up off the floor.
Right. And that's
And
what, that's why you call because
yeah.
you need support, you need help.
Well, I don't even know if I would have called if my dad or if my father didn't admit that he had already fallen twice
Oh,
and
fair
we didn't know
enough.
about it.
Okay.
So, and also he was begging to go because him and my mom were like awesome together and he just wanted to be there with my mom. So I think he was like, just bring me. I want to see your mother. Like,
Okay.
so he just wanted to be there with her. So they took him and they took him in and they were on the same COVID ICU floor because he had COVID because of course it was in the house. They were kept three doors down from each other and never allowed to see each other. And then, as everything progressed, by by the ninth, that day, that was when they put my mom on hospice. And, and she died on the 10th. And they let me come in. I wasn't supposed to go in. Like, I wasn't allowed to do anything. I wasn't allowed to. I asked for many things that they would not give. And I asked to come in every day. And I finally got to come in, and they said, "You're only coming in because both your parents are here." And so I came in, I saw my mother and the state of her. I had no idea. And yeah, I sat with her. And then eventually they brought my dad in. So I got to see my dad. And when my dad, the thing is, they never told my dad anything. So he didn't know what to expect when he was rolled in. And it was really like rough. Um, he had no idea. And so I was there. We were there for I was there for an hour before they brought my dad in. And then my dad came in for about maybe not even a half hour. And then they kicked us both out. They said, we've had, like, literally, the nurse said, you have had enough time with your mother. You have to leave. And I begged them to stay. They escorted me out. And then they took my dad and I begged them for me to go with my dad. And they said, nope, you don't get to go that way. You have to leave. And my mom died within the hour. And once my mom died, my dad called me and he said, this is not my world anymore. It's all
Mm.
yours." And his um, oxygen plummeted. And so, actually, I don't know if it was like him giving up on top of having him also gotten remdesivir, but days later, right? I don't know if that's kind of what happened, or just a mix of it all. I'm not sure. But my dad definitely did not want to be there anymore, and he refused my calls after that. And
Oh,
one of the things that happened is it's not, I don't even know if he really truly refused them or they kept the phone away from him. If you listen to people's stories about the protocols, phones were kept in places where patients couldn't get to them, food was kept from them. Um, I don't know what the situation was with my dad. So, but I know that at one point they called me to say he keeps pulling his oxygen mask off. And so they said, we're restraining him. And I said, wait, you're restraining my father? I said, I want to see him. Well, they said, well, he's been restrained for a few hours now, but we can show you. And my dad was always a big bear, and his hands and his legs were restrained. And he was screaming, cursing, wait, like, I just want effing, fresh air. And, he
yeah.
obviously did not know what was happening. And he was a PTSD veteran.
Oh,
And
he must have.
so
Yeah.
I said, get him off of those restraints now. It was obvious there was massive, like, trauma happening. And they said, well, the only way we're going to get him off the restraints is to put him on hospice, which is basically killing him with morphine. And I talked to my aunts very quickly. I said, this is the story. Like, I know what I want to do, but I'm going to run it by you. And I got the okay from some of my aunts, and we took him off restraints immediately. And he was put on morphine. And then he slowly died over. I mean, that happened on, I guess that happened on the 12th. And then on the 17th, he died.
That's a
I
lot.
still
That's
didn't get to
so
see
much.
him either. Like, the last time I saw him was with my mom.
That's hard. That's really,
Yeah.
really hard. So, what an incredible story. So, oh, that is really tough. So, you went from having a vibrant, healthy family, celebrating a really, really precious wedding anniversary, to having a family that felt like they were under the weather with like an illness, a pretty severe illness, right? And like COVID is COVID and the flu is the flu and pneumonia is pneumonia and people die from all of those things every single year. So it definitely is a thing, but that's a rapid change to
Yeah.
two parents hospitalized, to trying to navigate a really, really institutional, stressed out system that I'm not going to even spend 1 minute trying to understand or defend. But I thank my lucky stars that I didn't have to like live through it. Because I mean, nobody says like it's like nobody says that it was great, right?
Yeah.
Even people who were working in it, there were people who were trying to do the best they could in a situation that wasn't designed for that. Really good people were put in hard spots on everything, but to lose. So you went from in 2 weeks, you went from having a healthy family to losing both parents.
Right. Out of nowhere. And one of the crazy things is I actually I've had a lot of grief in my life. Like I said before, I had a stillbirth. I have lost people I loved very young. And I mean, the first experience of a friend who died was in freshman in high school. A friend of mine shot himself. Like I've had a lot. So I was actually working on a book on grief. And about 3 weeks before my parents went away for that vacation, I called my friend and I was working really intensely on this book. And I said, oh, grief sucks. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have my parents. I don't think I'd survive if they both were gone. And then three
Oh,
weeks later, that happened. It's kind of weird how the universe gives you these little, you don't see them till after, but like, it's kind of weird the way you get these like resonances that kind of shift through, right?
that does sound like that. Like like you're saying, you didn't notice it at the time, but looking back, it seems like there are synchronicities that were leading you up. I think
Right.
grief is absolutely tough. I'm not a grief expert or anything, but I will say that I think that everybody acknowledges that grief is tough, and that there's a bunch of different flavors of grief, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
even if you've been through one, if it hits you in a different way, it can be a different experience. So it's this tightrope of, you have one experience, but then you go through another and you're like, oh my God, well, this other grief experience did not prepare me
For
for
the
this
other
new
one.
one. Thanks very much, world. But
Right.
I don't think that anybody would discount how horrible what you went through was in terms of grief. And so now you shared with me that as a result of this, you describe yourself as going into shock
Oh,
and
yeah.
having your own version of PTSD.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I held it together and I even taught the day of the funeral, I think, online, like, because I just needed to, I teach kids, creativity. And I just I needed to get through and have some kind of schedule. I taught all the way through. And, but after, and I was re-traumatized too, because being in COVID, we were talking about smaller families. My family unit is only me. But I have many aunts and uncles. I have like over 30 cousins, and each of my family were baby boomer, and no one showed up to the funeral except they came on Zoom. But I was just in this big hall with like
Oh,
both of my
wow.
parents cremated, and I wasn't allowed to see their bodies because it was craziness. I was just trying. I said to the woman at one point, I'm like, please just let me see their bodies because I am not. I am starting to dissociate. I can feel it. I'm not. I'm making stories up, and I need to see them because otherwise. And she said, no, I'm not allowed. I tried to even walk in the room at one point because I'm like, you don't understand. Like I can feel everything separating, but they wouldn't let me, and so went out. I went as it was, and about I would say, I don't even know when, maybe like the next day after the funerals, I started to go into shock. And I don't remember 4 or 5 months of my life. I mean, I was
Oh,
there. I
so
have
that, yeah,
pictures.
right.
I have pictures we went through holidays and birthdays. I mean, my dad's birthday was October 8th. We got, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and my mom's birthday is January 7th, and then my birthday. Like all of this stuff that I celebrate my parents with while it was happening, I remember nothing.
But
Like,
you were going through it at the time.
yeah,
So that's dissociation. That's like,
totally
yeah.
dissociated. And
All right, so yeah, and one of the challenges, right? Like, so without saying that anybody that created any of these policies had the intention to do any of these things. COVID was like, and lockdown was such a weird thing where nobody knew what they were doing. And so people were making decisions. But by interrupting all of those sort of progressions of the grief process and the processing, it was really, really harmful to people who were in it because those rituals are really helpful, like are really, really helpful. And, people who, to give it a totally different, like non-COVID sort of thing. I have a close friend who was out of town studying when like a family member passed away, just a family member, right? Like this is
Yeah.
not a traumatic story or anything. But he honestly says, he's like, I forget that that happened. Like, because I wasn't a
Right.
part of the process of like doing all the things with my family because he was just away. So like when people talk about it, like, oh, right, that is what happened to that aunt. Like, because it's like,
Yeah.
if you're disconnected from getting to see the people and go through the process, those rituals are so helpful for so many of us, even though they're not fun.
No,
No
they're
one is
not.
ever going to
They
say
can
that they're
ruin
fun.
your ideas of seeing things, but I could feel as a therapist, I could feel what was going on.
You were
And to the
aware, yeah.
point of like right after the funeral, I immediately looked for a therapist. Like I was immediately looking for but again, not everybody was open and I had to go online. And you won't even believe this. I went to an art therapist because I'm an art therapist. So I thought I need an art therapist and I need it now. And I went to a therapist and the first thing she goes, so tell me your story. Why are you here? And I told her and she goes, so are you here because you killed your parents by not getting them vaccinated? And that was her first
Oh my
line
God.
to me. And I was like, what?
How helpful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, if you think about what happened at that time, like what the
Oh,
emotions were, what was happening. And then like the constant thing for me too, I do remember these little things. Like I remember my husband taking me out for walks, right? Like just trying to get out. And everywhere we went were healthcare hero things on everyone's lawn. And that was
right.
so traumatizing to me. I was
Because
like,
your parents had just died,
I
yeah.
just, yeah. And it was
At
the
the
healthcare
hands, yeah.
system that killed them. And it was like, I couldn't, it was really hard. We would have to go
Yes,
walking in places where I wouldn't see that. And I was like, it was, it was just really, it was a overwhelming time, you know?
absolutely. And it is like, so, right. It's one of those things where there is fault everywhere and blame everywhere, and also at the same time everyone was a victim, right?
Yeah.
So for
Oh,
the
yeah,
people
definitely.
working in the health system just trying to do their jobs the best they could with no information and no equipment, and there is that like super old, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's like people were trying to do things they thought were helpful, but along the way they were doing things that, in many, many ways were really, really harmful. I mean, and separating families in these end of life processes, one of the things that I think that people are most critical of. A very close friend who's totally unrelated, they had just moved his father into assisted living. Like, so
Mm.
like, like the week before lockdown.
Oh, and
So,
then they were
and then
taken, they were cut off, right?
they were cut off and he was cut off inside the facility. So like all the reasons they had put him in there to like the cafeteria and the socialization and all, none of that was happening, right? So here's this
Yeah.
poor guy who is lonely, who's moved into this facility. He's cut off from his family and he's cut off from like all
Right.
of the things. And nobody knows what's going on. It's like total chaos. And like, the family is hatching basically what is a senior jailbreak. They're like, we're going to go get him.
Yeah.
Anyway, they brought him home. They didn't have to jailbreak
Yeah.
him, but like all of those things, like, and your story is maybe one of the tragic, more
Well,
tragic.
there's a lot. I mean, if you are interested in like that, there's like a COVID betrayal, humanity betrayal project that outlines people's stories, and there's so many similarities between stories. It's really sad.
Yeah.
And and I understand the whole everybody has a good intention, but when you're in it and you see how the doctors talk to you when you're just like, hey, could we try vitamin C or could we try ivermectin? Or, my mother's in pain and the nurses would call me because my mom was so in pain. So one of the side effects of one of the drugs she took was systemic pain. And so she couldn't lay on her side or her back. And they wanted her to lay on her side. And they would call me and almost yell at me that my mom wasn't laying on her side. And I'm like, well, if you'd let me come there, I'd sit there and hold her. Like I can't.
Yeah.
And they would get really upset and mad at me when I would call and when she would call. Like it was being treated like not like a human being. And my mom
Yeah.
was so when I hear people say people were doing their best, maybe they were doing the best with the stress that they had, but I saw what I saw. And when I went in, my mother had the thinnest sheet on her. Her skin was cold. Her feet were hanging out. Her chest was hanging out. No one was looking at her. No one was coming in. And the nurses were laughing and having a great conversation in the hallway. So, when I think about it, I'm like, I had a very different experience than one where people seem to be honestly caring in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I believe you.
But I
I
don't
believe
want
you.
to say that as like I have friends who are in the healthcare.
Yes.
My friend worked at the hospital at the time. She wasn't allowed there, but she was an energy worker there, and she's like, I mean, I know that there are needed places, but people were so inhumane. And, it probably didn't help that my parents were unvaccinated. I hear a lot of people who, if they went into the hospital unvaccinated, they were treated differently. So it probably didn't
Mm.
help. Maybe that was part of the reason why I saw that side of it. I don't know.
That no, I have, and I don't have any information to share. I can
Yeah.
imagine, just like anything, and you were in New York where they were doing, and New
New
Jersey
Jersey.
where they were doing, with I don't know, in New York they were doing the daily, like everybody lean out and clap for the healthcare workers. And
Yeah.
even while it was happening, even though I wasn't involved, I was like, all of the praise and all of the support for people who are, pushing themselves, that's fine. But at the same time, I had that flash that I was like, people who are living through the other side of this, who
Yeah.
are experiencing the tremendous grief, that's hard. Which is very similar actually in the play. Like, so soldiers who came home from Vietnam who had signed up to do their
Yes.
job. And
Right.
when they came home, they were assaulted with people who were
Or
anti-war
spit in their
protesters, right?
faces
Exactly.
or right.
Very
And
similar, like
drafted. A lot of them were drafted.
drafted. It wasn't their choice.
Yes.
And so it's like just this, it's like such a narrow sort of thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's like two completely different experiences and they're just so different and polarizing. And when you put them together, it's oil and water, oil and water. And that must have been incredibly tough. So, you are aware. So I don't think I knew this. So as you were going through this, you were aware that things were falling by the wayside. Reached out to try and get professional assistance, which was very, very hard to get from like
Area. And
2020 to like
yeah,
everybody was busy.
all of the grief support groups, none of them were running.
Nothing,
Like,
right? Nothing was
yeah,
running.
there was nobody.
Everything was crisis only. If you were functioning at all, nobody had any like bandwidth for you. So how did you begin to come out of this overwhelming grief? Like what began to happen or do you remember? If
Yeah. No,
so,
I remember it clearly. And, to me, since I came out of it, it has been a journey that I'm still on. And it's really about seeing grief as a portal. And so what happened was, when your parents die 7 days apart without a will, you have to spend a lot of time on email and you have to spend a lot of time on the phone talking to people and trying to figure things out. And I would be on my mom's email. And somewhere, right, it's almost like my body took care of me and said, okay, when you're ready, we're gonna like just start to give you little things to move through, right? And so I all of a sudden noticed that my mom was like really involved in this human design group, right? And so
okay.
because every other day was another message from her as I go, because it was months without her responding, right? And so I reached out to this woman. I just out of nowhere. I really think my mom was like, "Hey, do something. Like
Right.
move. Go, go." And so I reached out to this woman because I just wanted to be close to my mom for a minute. And I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
And so I called this woman and I'm like, I have no money. Everything's off and everything, but this is my situation and I need a little help. And she had this 6 month human design moon cycle women's group. And I'm like, this sounds so nice. And she gave me a scholarship to it and let me come in. And that was beginning to talk. Like it was a place where I could talk a little bit, but not in a grief way, right? It was like I
Right.
could talk about it and and people supported me and I was learning about my human design, which I'd known about, but it was really, and because that was the first step, the next thing I did was I was interested in transcendental meditation because I
Okay.
thought I just didn't feel settled in my body. So I went and I got my mantra for transcendental meditation. And during that time, my husband and I started walking more regularly. And we also started doing cold plunges. I don't
Okay.
know why I came up with that, but I would cold plunge every day with,
It was the Hoff method was hot then. I will
yeah.
say that. Like that was a thing that was getting a lot of attention and a lot of research.
Yeah.
So I would, so
Yeah.
okay, so all
So
right,
we
very
ended up
good.
doing that. Yeah. And then slowly that whole thing, like my mom began to drop breadcrumbs everywhere. I really do believe that she was like pushing me in different ways because people were offering me things from all these different places. So once I finished that, I found another, I ended up finding another human design person but she was more my style. And I was just, I was like, I really need to do this program. And I felt it and I did that thing again where I just said yes to it and I reached out. I'm like, it was like a lot of money. I'm like, I don't have the money, but I feel like it's something I need to move into something else. And she said, yeah, it's all yours. And through her, I learned about Akashic records and through something else.
Okay.
And I ended up in like a past life of mine. And so I ended up reaching out to this woman and I just to say, hey, can I have a session with you? Because I don't know what happened. And she was like, you're meant to be an Akashic Records guide. I'm going to gift you this training. From there, like it just kept happening, right? And it kept me busy. So I didn't have a lot of downtime. I was always in a program. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
It was bits and pieces and nuggets of things, but not all at once. And I was learning. And it was also like these programs that I was in that were bringing in elements of my parents within me, how I grew up, my inner child. Like it was all kind of this stuff going on. And then I hit a wall, and
Okay.
that wall was the winter time, like the fall of 2022, when all my kids got sniffles for the first time since my parents died. And all of a
Would have
sudden,
reminded you of the
right,
beginning of what had happened before.
right,
So, and that's the way the trauma cycle works, right? You don't
yeah,
know
right.
what your trigger is. And then so did you overreact? Was it really scary?
Oh, I didn't sleep for days. I prayed over my kids while they were sleeping. Please don't die. Please don't die. Please don't die.
And did you
I was
know that
going
was
crazier.
PTSD when you were doing it?
I knew as soon as it happened really quickly and then I
Yeah.
didn't have sleep. And so then you start to think you're crazy. And then you
Right.
start, when you go 3 days without sleep and you're trying to sleep, but you can't sleep because you're still healing. You have three kids in the house, you're sick for days. Even if it's only a small thing that passes, there's always a sniffle for like a week and a half. And I wasn't sleeping. My heart was palpitating. Like I
Yeah.
didn't know what was going on. And I reached over and I think my mom did it again to me. She kind of pushed me towards this Insight Timer. And on Insight Timer, I started listening right away I found Allie Boothroyd, who was my teacher. And I listened to her yoga nidras and I started listening every day, morning, noon, and night. I just started doing like just listening, even if it was like a 15-minute yoga nidra or like a half hour yoga nidra or a nighttime 90-minute, almost three times a day I would do that. And within 3 weeks, I was better than before.
Okay.
And yeah, so I started to like, I totally balanced my nervous system and I could be back to where I was.
So you
And
lucked out though. Like, so for people who are listening, if you find yourself in one of those situations, one of the major signs of that overreactive stress syndrome, the PTSD, is that sleep disappears. Like
yes,
you just don't sleep. And there's always another reason, right? Something is going on. In your case, it was the
it's
kid,
triggering it.
but right,
Yeah.
it's triggering it. But it's like that's that overreaction, and your body is so stressed out that you can't sleep. You can't relax into the sleep. Like so, like
And your
noise, the
mind is
sniffle,
going,
your
yeah, and your
mind is
heart's
going,
going.
the heart palpitations, the whole thing, and with so many things. Since you have a therapy background, that's the reason that I asked you. People, you can be really knowledgeable about this, really knowledgeable, but
And you don't know.
you don't know. You really kind of need
Right.
somebody to look at you and be like,
Yeah.
so listen, you have PTSD and you need some help because it's like you need somebody to help you bring it back. And there's a bunch of different techniques. So you were, I think, really fortunate that the yoga nidra worked for you, and you had the tools to be able to make that happen. Because I think a lot of people do need somebody else to help them dial it in and bring them back to their body.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I didn't mention this before, but being an expressive arts therapist, so even through the time when I was in shock, I was writing every day and
yeah.
painting every day. Like I can look at it and I'm like, oh, who wrote that? And it was me, right?
Oh, there you go.
Like
So
I have no idea. But I was throughout this entire period, I was writing. I must have like 60 notebooks through that first 2 years. I was writing every day, or I was sketching, or I was drawing, and I was working with myself.
Yeah.
So I had backup too for myself. Like I was working in soul shamanism. I had the Akashic Records training.
Yeah.
I was working with my human design. I was working with a lot. And the yoga nidra, like, 'cause I could feel that balance come out, but it just happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what yoga nidra was. I'm like, I just need to calm down. And the transcendental meditation wasn't working for me at that point. I'm like, I just need to calm, because you're just quiet, right? You're like, you're just
Yeah.
this mantra going. I'm like, I can't do it. Like, there's too much going on. I was so crazy. And then the more that I would like stay awake, the more less sleep I would get, the more I'd go, oh my God, please don't die. Like they're gonna, and I would
Yes.
imagine scenarios in my head of like,
Which is
oh
also it's like the only solution for the only way this can go is that it's going to be that's one of those loops. Like you've pre-decided that the loop, and that's one of the things of an overactive stress thing
yeah,
that we need people to help us. So, like for example, like if somebody had been at the bedside who had been knowledgeable, like people who work with trauma and stress, and they had been able to say, okay, so right now, you're pretty sure your kids are going to die, but are there any other ways this could happen? Like to walk you through there being other alternatives,
yeah,
and a reminder that they are breathing, a reminder that you are breathing, that nobody's in the hospital. Those are the ways we break those loops. But all right, so.
yeah,
I like to talk to people about not just the changes that are happening, right? Because you did not have control over your parents getting sick, anybody getting sick, anybody
no,
dying. That was all outside of your control. None of that was a choice. It impacted you. But I'd love to look at some other things and see what you think about whether or not you see choices there
yeah,
now. This is it's not like a judgment thing. It's like
sure.
okay. So, like moving in with your parents, like I brought that
Yes,
up earlier, that sounds like that was absolutely a choice
yes.
that you guys got to make. And so that felt like a cheese. Okay. At any point, did experiencing the grief the way you were going through it, did that feel like a choice at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I walked head on into it. There was a time, probably 6 or 7 or 8 months in, where I said, my parents aren't coming back. I was still making up stories that they weren't dead. Like there were so many things going on, and I was like, they're not coming back. I'm gonna use this for all it's worth,
Okay.
and I'm gonna move toward. I'm gonna, because here's the other thing about parental death. Being an only child, this weighs into my grief a lot. Being an only child, living with my parents as an adult, I did not take on who I am. I was still living under making them happy. I was still living under all of that.
The
So for
identity of a
me,
child.
right. So for
Yeah.
me, or like looking for the recognition or whatever it be,
Yeah.
right? So for me, it was like I had no foundation. I had
Yeah.
nothing,
It happens
nothing.
so fast. I can see that.
So
There's one of the
yeah,
things about losing your parents that some people will say is they say that's when you really actually become an adult
yeah.
is after you lose your parents. And I don't think it's always true because there are people who separate, like, but it can very much feel
Well,
that
if you
way.
were like me, where I still felt like a child in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
100%. I see it.
And so I had no foundation. So I don't think I had a choice other than I mean, yeah, you said it was a choice, but I think it was a choice,
There you
but I
go.
also
Yeah.
don't think it was a choice at the same time. Like I could have kept going the way I was going, but I was like, I'm just going to look at it. I'm going to start saying, who the hell am I? Like, and where do my
Yeah.
parents reside in me still? And where, and what didn't I like about them? And what do I like? And I really stood and looked it in the eye. And I've been doing that since it happened.
Well, that I think is fascinating because one of the things that I think, just me, Amy, like I am not qualified to say this is my opinion. Nobody should listen to me. But I think there's power in seeing choices where it is. So it's like, sometimes you don't have any choice. We don't have a choice about whether or not we're catching, a virus from our kids. Like, that's
Right.
not, we don't elect for that, right? But where we can see choices like, hey, how do I want to respond to this now that I have the tools? Becoming aware of it, I think can feel very empowering. That's just my own opinion. Okay, so
Yeah.
coming on this show to talk about your grief, hopefully that feels like a choice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hopefully that feels like a choice. All right, so in a minute, we're going to do the final questions, but I do want to give you a chance to tell the people about what you do because you've listed all these amazing things that are a part of your life and
Oh,
are a
yeah.
part of your recovery. But tell us about what you actually do and how people can connect and follow you online.
Well, yeah, I do a lot of things. I'm a soul art guide and a yoga nidra guide and an Akashic Records guide and a human design guide. And I was an expressive art therapist for many years. But that world for me was not as spiritual as I wanted it to be. So right
Okay.
now I take all those skills and I use them with soul art and with yoga nidra and with like Akashic records.
All
I
of
kind
those
of weave
things.
it all together. And I offer soul sessions and soul art journeys. And right now, like we were talking about Insight Timer, where I found Yoga Nidra, I'm a teacher on there. And there I have a whole course on how I went through my grief. And I also have Yoga Nidras for grief, but I also have Yoga Nidras for all kinds of stuff and inspirations about living a life that's authentic. Like one of the things I like to call myself is a cultivator of curiosity and creativity in the human experiment, because I think that's what we're in. And if we can approach it with curiosity, creativity, and some respect for our body, or, even,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like that's the way. So
I
that's kind of what I
I
do.
agree. And you, before we started, a part of this conversation that the audience is not aware of because we were not recording yet, is that you did say it's like, hey, part of this is a COVID story. Like, how comfortable
Yeah.
are you with me? And I was like, no, go for it, because I think that curiosity is, for me, it's one of the things that really lets me allow and honor other people's experience, even if they're absolutely different than mine. Like
Oh,
if
yeah.
I have a totally, I'm so fortunate that I did not end up in the hospital or during COVID. But the fact that that was my experience for me doesn't mean that I can't honor the absolute truth of everybody else's experience in that time. And that for me is rooted in curiosity and really, respect,
Oh, yeah.
like having
Being
the
open
respect.
to the
Yes.
stories that are around you, you
Right.
know,
Even
all,
and even if like, so yeah, 100%. So I love that. I do. So Insight Timer, you guys, is an app for anybody who's not aware. It's an
yeah.
app, and so you can search for Jocelyn on there. It's a used to be back in the day. Everything was free on Insight Timer, and I used it a lot for free meditations. Now there's many, many amazing programs that you can buy on there, and it's a whole thing. But Insight Timer, and I'll put a link to the app in the show notes, and I encourage people to do that. Jocelyn, are you ready for the final rapid fire questions?
Oh, yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, let's do it. These are just for fun. They're not based on anything. Just answer with whatever comes to mind. Are you a morning, midday, or evening person?
Most times I'm a morning. Most
Okay.
times. When I was younger, I was a nighttime person, but now I wake up at like 5 in the morning.
All right. I'm a morning person, but I have no idea whether I was beaten into me,
Yeah, right? You're not really
or whether
sure. Especially after having kids. You're like, am I?
I was the best toddler parent. Everybody in bed by 7:30 and up at 5 a.m. I was so happy. Teenage years were we're
Yeah.
on a different schedule now.
I know
Different
I
young
feel it.
adults were on a
Teenagers.
different schedule. Exactly. Exactly. All right. If you were making travel reservations, would you prefer like I was when I was thinking about this, it was air travel. Would you prefer to like travel all day, or would you book yourself on an overnight red eye?
You mean like travel all day by like RV or something or
RV
by
or
destination?
by plane? Like, would you rather
Oh,
travel
yeah.
during the day and do that, or at night and wake
I
up in a new place?
I used to travel back and forth from New York from New Jersey to San Francisco every weekend for a year, and I've done with planes. I don't need any more planes. On the way back, we were over the Rockies. I was coming back. I was going there to be driven back for good,
Okay.
and or to drive whatever direction I was going. I had a moment over the Rockies where I was like, it is just this really thin piece of metal between my feet and thousands. And I could feel like, you know what I'm saying? Like
You're like,
feel the
people are
vibration.
not meant to be in the
No,
tube in the air.
but it was because I had to hold it in for so
Yeah.
many flights that I have not, I'm good with not going on a plane. If it takes me a long time to drive, I'm okay with that. And I think these days, as I get older, I'm like, let me experience it. But,
Okay. Now,
but
when you
yeah.
were flying back San Francisco to Jersey, did you do the overnight, like the red eye?
I always did the red eyes. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I had school the next day.
And
I
did you
lived
get up and go to
get
school?
up
Would
and
you be able to
go.
do it? When I was
Yeah.
in my 20s, I would get up and go, but it was like there were rules. There were rules for myself that I would like, you can't sit down. You cannot like, if you're going to
Just
do the
keep
red
going.
eye and go into the office, you cannot like sit on the bed to put your socks on. It's like
Yeah.
shower and don't stop and don't go. Because if you sit down for a second, you're out. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon
Yeah.
and you have missed your day. All right, so very good. So, what is your favorite type or genre of movie? Like, what kind of movies do you like? Do you like romance movies, like
Yeah.
comedies, action films? What's your favorite?
I love all movies, but I love a movie that makes me cry because it's like those touching movies, like they're touching moments. You're not like bawling because someone's dying of cancer or something, but you're like, it's so good, like that.
Okay. Okay.
So
I
like
don't even know
that's what
what
I
genre
love.
that would be. So
I
like the
don't know.
Notebook kind of thing
I
or
never saw The Notebook,
okay.
but I just was, this, it could be any genre because I just watched Armageddon, and at the end of
And you had a
Armageddon,
touching moment in that. Yeah.
oh my God, at the end, they're coming off the plane and I'm crying because thank God they're back. But at the same time, I'm like, the dad's not there. And I just love
Okay,
getting
so
emotional.
anything with a strong emotional connection. Toy Story. Did you cry in Toy
I
Story?
think I did when I
Oh
first
yeah.
saw it with the garbage. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If there's anybody who didn't cry in Toy Story 3, I don't want to know that person. But all right, very good. That's it, Jocelyn Bates. Thank you so much for being an
Well,
amazing
thank you
guest
for
on the
having me
show.
today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for listening today. I hope that you enjoy the show. And before I go, I want to encourage you to become a bigger part of the conversation. Obviously, subscribe wherever you're listening to the show. Listen to more episodes. That'd be great. Again, please write a review and tell your friends about the show. That truly is a great help for getting the show in front of new people. Okay, but more fun for you yourself, head over to imperfectadulting.com and join the email community. You'll get some free stuff right away, and that way you'll begin to get the emails about the podcast. This includes the links for the special offers from the guests, and it's the only way to get that. Also, if you aren't in the mood to listen, I actually include an article directly in those emails. Whee! Now, if you love this and you crave more time with me, Amy, as a coach, a mentor, or just adultier adult, numero uno, check out The Village. If you have a story you want to share with the listeners, I'd love to hear from you. I have an open application. Just let me know you want it. And that's a wrap for today. Until next time, remember, the journey is the destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that, not me. Well, until just now, I did just say it. But what I want you to hear today is that if your adulting journey isn't going the way you expected, that may not mean that you're lost. It may just mean that you're on your way. This is Amy Stone, signing off. The Imperfect Adulting podcast is created and produced by Amy Stone and Amy Says So. Anything expressed on this show is offered as entertainment, and the views of the guests may not always represent the ideas and viewpoints of the host. That's me. Amy does not intend or hold herself out to provide professional advice or recommendations of any kind. In the end, you and you alone need to make those kinds of decisions based on your personal and individual situation, needs, circumstances, and comfort level.